Welcome everybody to our virtual movie night discussion. Before we get started, I just want to say a quick thank you to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation for their continued support. As always, they do a fantastic job. And of course, to our sponsor as well, Generac Power System. Thank you again for your sponsorship and the foundation for all their help, and particularly Ms. Jennifer Carlson, the executive director for the foundation. We are here tonight to talk about one of my most favorite movies ever made. I am a huge Kubrick fan, and this was the first one I ever saw from Stanley Kubrick. This is Paths of Glory with Kirk Douglas, George Macready, Adolphe Menjou, Wayne Morris, and Ralph Meeker, who you might remember from The Dirty Dozen. He was Lee Marvin's right-hand man as they were training the dozen. And it was really good to see him. And as well, I want to find this gentleman, Joe Turkel, too. You might remember him from The Shining, another Stanley Kubrick movie. He was the bartender. Many years later, when he did that movie, he looks totally different from what he looks like in Paths of Glory. But it's nice to see these people coming back, some of my favorite actors. Paths of Glory, of course, from 1957, directed by Stanley Kubrick. This was his fourth full-length picture, but his first major motion picture, or at least one that had acclaim associated with it. Of course, you remember Stanley Kubrick from other movies such as Spartacus, Dr. Strangelove, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Clockwork Orange, Full Metal Jacket, The Shining. The list can go on and on. Cinematography in this movie was done by George Krause. You are not going to see too much done by him. He is a German cinematographer, worked primarily in German movies and German TV. If you've ever seen The Doctor of Stalingrad or Escape from East Berlin, you might have seen some of his cinematography handiwork, but not too many people have seen those outside of Europe, much less Germany. So we'll talk a little bit more about the cinematography later. Of course, this movie was based on the novel by the same name, which was written by Humphrey Cobb in 1935. Humphrey Cobb was a World War I veteran, served with the Canadians at the Battle of Amiens. And Stanley Kubrick was able to pick up the rights from this book many years after it was written. As a matter of fact, it wasn't even in publication anymore when Stanley Kubrick went to see Mr. Cobb's wife about getting the rights. Picked it up for a quick 10 grand and made this fantastic movie out of it. Produced by Harrison Kubrick Pictures, distributed by United Artists, and it was released on Christmas Day of 1957. That'd be a nice little Christmas present to go see this. Not exactly a Christmas-themed movie, but still released on Christmas Day. And it was released 1 week after Bridge on the River Kwai from David Lean, which we talked about a few months ago. So it was really in competition with that. And especially when you look at both of them, and like we spoke about when we looked at Bridge on the River Kwai, it's kind of an anti-war movie. This is definitely in the anti-war movie category. Stanley Kubrick was an anti-war advocate, and that comes across in a lot of his films. But to have to go up against Bridge on the River Kwai, that's a contender to go up against for sure. Had a budget of just under $1 million. $900,000 is what they made this movie for. And about a third of that cost went to Kirk Douglas's salary on this. This movie probably would not have been made if it was not for Kirk Douglas. Many studios didn't want to touch this because of its anti-war sentiments and the way Kubrick wanted to produce the movie. But once Kirk Douglas signed on board, he was already a major Hollywood star by this point. And, once you sign a major star on a movie that nobody wants to do, everybody kind of wants to do it now. It gives it that kind of credibility. Like I said, it premiered 1 week after Bridge on the River Kwai, and it's actually based on a true story. What they call the Swan Corporal Affair. This really happened in 1915. 1915. 4 French corporals were charged for failure to obey orders. There's actually many more than that. It was almost like 30. Many privates along with them. I think 26 of the privates, they were found guilty, but they had the charges dismissed and their slates wiped clean. But these 4 corporals, they kept with the guilty charge. They were executed for their actions. And it was a similar situation. It was almost an impossible task that they were being asked to do. They tried to do it similar to the movie, but the higher ups felt that they didn't do enough. And so they charged them. There was a 3-man panel, just like you see in the movie, of higher officers that were conducting the court. But these gentlemen, even though they were executed, they were found exonerated in 1934 after the family members kept bringing these petitions to the French courts to re-examine the case and look at the facts. And once that the courts finally decided to do that, they realized that these men were not guilty of the charges that they were brought up against, and they were exonerated. And those 3-man panels, such as you see here in the movie, those were ended in 1916 for that exact reason. The French government, the French citizens, the French soldiers, they all realized that it was not a very fair way to conduct a trial or to accuse soldiers of cowardice or of treason or of even just failure to obey orders. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well as we go on through the night. This film was very controversial at the time. It was banned in France, Switzerland, and Spain. Belgium required a foreword with the movie that basically said that this story represented an isolated case that did not reflect upon the gallantry of the French soldiers. France, it was not seen anywhere until 1975, Switzerland until 1978, Spain until 1986. And even on US installations overseas, the film was not banned, but they just didn't show it on military installations overseas for the US. So it was a very controversial film at the time, but now it is known as a classic. It was deemed as culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant in 1982, which allowed it to be selected for preservation in the U.S. National Film Registry. And I mean, what can you say about this movie? It's just fantastic. I'll stop talking now because I've been rambling on for almost 7 minutes. What did you guys think of the film? Chris, I see you got your poster up there.
I thought it was a terrific movie. I liked the direction of it. I liked the editing of it in particular. I thought that was very well done. And as in the past, I had a Blu-ray version where I got to see a bunch of extras, which had some interesting facts in them that played out on this. The thing that one of the things about the movie, the episode, it reminded me of another episode in World War II, the execution of Private Slovik. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It was a book written by William Bradford Huey, and Slovik was the only soldier since the Civil War to be executed for desertion in the American forces. So this is very similar. This as soon as I saw this, I had an immediate reaction to that the similarity between the two. And in Slovik's case, the story, as I recall it, was that there were a lot of people who deserted, but he was the only one that really went this way because he had become a pacifist during the war and basically refused to fight. He was tried, convicted, and as I understand it, they thought that as it went up through the chain, the death sentence would be commuted, and it never was, right up to General Eisenhower.
And I'll come back to that in a moment. And if I forget, please remind me. But I just kind of want to get around to everybody else and see what they thought of the film. John, what did you think?
Well, I tell you, within the first half hour or so, I thought this dialogue is kind of amateur, just the way it was being presented. And then it dawned on me, and I've seen foreign films that have dubbed sentences, and the dialogue doesn't seem to have the normal conversational syntax. And that's what it seemed like. And then it hit me. These are British and Americans trying to act like French. Was Kubrick some kind of genius that he put the dialogue in that way so it would come out as if they were being dubbed? But those short, curt little sentences the dialogue just didn't seem to flow. But once I realized that, no, he's doing that, so it was that quick, short little messages, then I got over that and it flowed pretty well. Very interested in the absolution of the higher ups, and the grunts caught it all. You agree?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've talked about this.
Not total absolution, though. One of them does.
That's true.
Get his comeuppance in the end. But it's definitely from General Boulard. Yeah, absolution all the way around. Just ridiculous. Lisa, how about you? What did you think?
I thought the movie was very good. The movie itself, I was like impressed with when they were advancing, and just all the artillery sounds, and I kept thinking, this is 1958. Right? That's when it was made, 1958.
57.
57. Yeah, and I was like, wow, this is really good. But the story itself made my stomach hurt, and I wanted to puke.
Yeah. And just kind of to go back to what Chris said, how you were talking about Private Slovak and how everybody thought the sentence was going to be commuted, and it never was. Kubrick actually had written an alternate ending to this movie to make it a little happier, where the sentence was commuted at the end. Kirk Douglas basically shot that down. He said, no, I'm not going to do this movie if you're going to do that. We need to have the ending that we saw in the film. It's not a happy ending, but it needs to be in there. That's the way the story needs to be told. If you want to change the ending just to make it a better movie so you can make more money off it, I'm not your guy. The studios wanted the ending changed as well to reflect that happy ending feeling that you would probably expect to get. And when they did not change the ending, they sent an edited script to the studio, and they were just supposed to send just the last few pages with the ending the way it was. They didn't. They sent the whole script entirely, knowing that the studio executives would not read it. That's too much for them to read. They're too busy. And so it just kind of passed by everybody that this happy ending was not going to happen until they saw the final cut. And then they were a little amazed. But I tell you, this movie would not be the same if it had had a Hollywood, happy ending, just so it seemed more palatable to the audience, and they would make more money off it. This movie would not be the classic that it is today. So I'll jump right into the questions real quick before I start blathering on even more about this movie. So we see this movie is about these 3 French soldiers. They are accused of cowardice. They are going to be brought to trial, and we'll talk about the trial. But before we get to that, I want to talk about the settings. There's 2 types of setting in this movie, really. You have basically the life of the officers and the life of the soldiers, 2 completely different worlds. But just from a cinematography point of view, from an aesthetic visual point of view, which setting do you think was your favorite? Robinson?
I don't know if either of those would be considered my favorite. I think they were probably both embellished. I think the trench shots of the soldiers probably were far more realistic. In my mind, I was wondering, hey, how are the trenches so close to these massive mansions where they're having balls going on and these fabulous late morning breakfasts and things like that. So I didn't really look at either as being something I preferred more in the film. I thought the trenches, of course, were more fitting. However, the story of the self-aggrandizing of the senior officers, of course, was supported, I think, by the lavish surroundings that we saw them in many of the scenes throughout.
Yeah, Kubrick definitely did that on purpose. He wanted to create that contrast in a visual manner. And that's kind of why I asked which setting was your favorite, because when I watch this movie, I have to watch it at different times for different things. If I sit down to watch it and I just want to look at the cinematography, I'm really going to blank everything else out. I'm not going to look at the acting. I'm just going to marvel at what Kubrick and George Krause did. I just think it's visually, it's just a spectacular movie. It just really floors me, and even more so that it's done in black and white, not in color. And I just think that it was such a bold move at the time, and I think it just really brings everything forward. But you're right. How are these mansions so close to the front lines? There would have been a couple miles distance, but I don't know. I never really thought about it like that. But I know that really the front lines were very close to everything during World War One, particularly if you watch like 1917 and some of the research I did on that. The opening shot is of these guys sitting by a tree, and then they get tasked this detail, and they get up, and within 2 minutes of walking, they're in the trenches. So there really was that dichotomy between the trenches and, I guess for lack of a better term, the rest of the world. They really were that close in some instances. But go ahead, Lisa. Go ahead.
Well, I thought like the narcissism that just poured out of these people. I thought that the opulence of the mansions and how they would just sit down to dinner, and it was without regard, and that was completely what was painted, without regard.
And it's that's the way it kind of panned out. I don't want to just paint this with a broad brush and say all French officers were like this, but this is a common theme throughout World War One, particularly the first couple years, from the French and particularly the French officers. There was a deep disconnect between the orders that they were being given, or that the orders that the officers were giving, and what was actually having to happen in the trenches and executing those orders. Many accounts that I've read talk about that disconnect and how unrealistic it really was. So you're right, absolutely. Now, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me about those scenes of lavishness was how that seems to be a theme in so many of the war movies. I think Joya Noel had a similar scene of ballroom or whatever. And it also occurred to me that Dirty Dozen, the scene where they actually attack the Germans. They're having a ball at that time with all the officers and so on. So it seems to me to be a way of emphasizing that disconnect, as you say, the disconnect between the grunts and the higher ups.
Yeah, and that kind of makes me wonder, is that disconnect still there today? I mean, certainly I didn't see it in Iraq, but that's because there was no opulent mansions out in the middle of the desert. Everybody kind of had to, share the same space. I would hope that, that kind of mentality has passed in the military, but certainly during World War One and World War II, probably World War II was the last time that you really see this. Commanders are on the battlefield. There's really no equal to them except for maybe God. They are gods out there, and so they should be treated as such. And that was the mentality. We look back on it, whether right or wrong, but that's the way that they thought back then. And so they took that mindset and they went with it. Just to point out as well, this movie was made entirely in Germany. Those lavish chateau scenes and castle scenes and the opulent, breakfast rooms and whatnot, those were all shot in, and I know I'm going to totally mess this up, Schleißheim Castle, which is actually near Dachau concentration camp, which would be just outside of, oh goodness, my German geography is escaping me. That's okay. Schleißheim Castle. That's where it was mostly shot at. And then the trench systems and all of the war scenes were filmed in a German farmer's, on his farm. They paid this German farmer a significant amount of money. They spent a month tearing this field up, making these bomb craters, digging these trenches, putting in the barbed wire. I think they did a pretty good job of recreating a trench system from World War One. In some scenes, especially in the last scene when they're going over the top and they're going to rush the anthill. If you look closely, you can see the German town in the background. They really didn't have the editing technology to get rid of that stuff that they do nowadays. But you have to look really hard, and they're just really quick. But you can see the German town in the background. You can tell, obviously, they are not in France, because German towns look very different from French towns. But yeah, the opulence. And like I said, I watched this film for different reasons at different times. And the black and white, I don't know what it is about that. It really brings out the grittiness of the trench landscape, as far as I'm concerned. But I think it even does better justice to the chateau scenes. It's just something about the black and white. You can see the reflection on the floor. You can see all the little details because of the nuances of shadows and contrasting that back and forth with the lights and shapes. It just, everything seems to stand out more for me. I don't know. That's just my opinion.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead,
I was
Audrey.
wondering why it was filmed in Germany. I noticed with interest that it was filmed in Bavaria, and my husband's family 100 years ago was originally from Bavaria. And I thought that was kind of ironic, since this is a film about a war that began with German aggression. And also the other point is that I didn't know that it was filmed in Schlossheim Castle, but it was interesting that some of the very large paintings, I know I saw one and I said, oh, that's Watteau. So it must have been filmed in France. And I didn't know until the end that it was filmed in Germany. And I was wondering, if I guess they may have a Watteau or two in Germany, but I thought that was kind of interesting.
Or that's just the set designer going, look, if we don't put something up here that looks French, we may not be believed. A good set designer will notice those details and try to add what they can. You ask why it was shot in Germany, and I did read this the other day. Sorry, there's somebody up here on the floor, and I'm supposed to be the only one in the building right now. It was there was a couple of different reasons. If I remember correctly, one of them had to do with union costs. Because they only had a very small budget for this film, under $1 million, union costs to shoot it in America were going to be far higher than they could afford. I'm not sure what kind of union wages they have to pay in France, but in Germany, they were dirt cheap. And that was one of the considerations for filming in Germany at the time. And that's about the best answer I can give you on that. I can't, like I said, there was another reason as well. And I can't recall what that was.
One of the things I thought was interesting about the choice of that castle for the particularly for the opening scene, was the size of it compared to the soldiers that are marching up to it. And they almost look like toy soldiers marching into their positions.
Yeah, and you kind of get that feeling as well toward the end of the movie when they're being marched out to be executed. Yeah, you can see right there in that top picture that Molly just put up. And that's when the soldiers are coming out square in the middle at the top. And you're right, Chris, just the enormity of the backdrop compared to the soldiers themselves. And then we see that again in the courtroom scene. You have this grand hall with just voices echoing everywhere. And they're only using a very small portion of it. I think that's one of Kubrick's geniuses. And I sure would like to find out more about George Krause to see how much input he had in the cinematography aspect. But using space and dimension, that's the word I was looking for, was something that Kubrick really got into. And I think this is one of the first movies where he's really allowed to experiment with that on a much bigger scale than he had been in the past. And you start to see it a lot more in more of his movies. Certainly the War Room in Dr. Strangelove, huge room with the big table in the middle. 2001, he has all kinds of room because he's dealing primarily with space. And other than that, point out. Oh, The Shining as well with the Overlook Hotel. He really uses dimension and scale in that movie too. I think that's probably the movie where you see he's perfected that cinematographic element. But yeah, going back to Chris's point, dimension and scale really is really a feature in Kubrick's movies. So from now on, when you watch a Kubrick movie, just try to keep that in mind, dimension and scale. Kubrick loves to mess with that all the time.
And there are two others I could mention. Clockwork Orange, and I think his last one was it Barry Lyndon. I think you could.
Yeah, I haven't seen Barry Lyndon, and as I was doing my research for this, I'm like, why haven't I seen that film? I have to go see that now.
Yeah.
And it's been a very long time since I've seen Clockwork Orange, so I can't really recall any aspects of that film except for Roddy McDowall sitting in the chair with his eyes taped open. That's all I can recall out of that movie.
I saw Clockwork Orange when I was in high school, and I was in a Catholic high school. Actually, I was in the same Catholic high school as Sonia Sotomayor. She's our claim to fame. Cardinal Spellman High School up in the Bronx in New York City. And I went to see that film, and somehow we mentioned it, and the nun overheard us talking, and she was absolutely livid that we would see that movie. And I was so afraid from her reaction. I always put it out of my mind. And I've never read Anthony Burgess's novel, but now I'm just, oh my gosh, I went to see this terrible movie, because at that time you still would go into the foyer of your church, 14th Street in Manhattan, where I lived. And in the foyer was the list of the prohibited movies, the R's, the X's. I mean, and they were really strict. There was probably almost nothing that you could see but Bambi. But Barry Lyndon is really, if you like the cinematography, the photography, and the special thing about Barry Lyndon is the light, that he actually used natural light instead of artificial light in many of the scenes. And I'm not technically adept enough to explain all that, but that was that, plus the music from Barry Lyndon. Probably if somebody hummed it, it had some memorable music as well. So
I'm kicking myself for not having seen that yet at this point in my life. Half a century's gone by. I need to stop wasting time and go see that one for sure.
Well, now you have something to look forward to.
I do, as a matter of fact. So getting into the questions, I was kind of setting up the film. We know that General Moreau is initially approached by General Bullard, this attack on the anthill. General Moreau's initial response. Is everybody okay there?
That's a dog, sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. I thought it was a dog. It kind of sounded like a dog.
Yeah.
Oh, it's okay, Clark. He's just yakking on a bone. So General Bullard approaches General Moreau with this plan to attack the anthill. General Moreau's first response is, "That's crazy. There's no way we can do it." But let me dangle, something in front of your face here: a promotion, a nice transfer. Now, what do you think? Oh, of course we can do it. Well, I don't know if we can do it, but it certainly is worth a thought and a try, isn't it? Isn't that? What did everybody think of that initial change of heart from General Moreau? And does it really establish him as possibly the bad guy for the rest of the movie? Go ahead, Lisa.
It was just pure gross, and it just it set him up. He was gonna do it for his ego, and that's why I said that the narcissistic traits that run through this movie, you could sit there with a psychology paper and check them off, because it is pretty darn gross.
Go ahead, Robert. Did you have something to add?
I do, yeah. So I had never seen this movie before. And in that particular scene, I thought, wow, what a noble leader. He's putting his men first. He's considering, the impact of this attack on the survivability of his troops. So I didn't realize what was about to happen when the promotion was tendered, and he had an immediate change of heart. And I think his character shone through for the rest of the movie at that point. And he held true to who he disclosed himself to actually be at that point in the film. But it was disgusting. Gross is an apt description. But at first I thought, wow, what some great ideology he has. as a leader of troops, and then boom, a promotion is dangled in front of him, and he's like, "Yeah, it's all right, throw him to the wolves."
Yeah, I mean, one of his first lines when he's told about this mission is, I look out for the welfare of my troops first. That's first and foremost in my mind. And within a minute, he's completely done a backflip and has gone off on a different trail altogether. Chris, did you have something there?
Yeah, I thought there were a couple of things about that scene once you see the whole movie. The first one was that the next scene is him, as I recall, was he's going through the trenches in that long tracking shot, and you see the arrogance and his narcissism in that, right down to the point of denying the existence of shell shock, and I think that Kubrick took the Patton slap from World War II and embedded it in that scene where he slaps the shell shock soldier. But the other thing too was it contrasts, I think, with the bookend where Dax at the end is the general dangles some stuff in front of him, and Dax refuses to kowtow to that.
Exactly right, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's exactly what I was thinking. Is who's going to talk about that contrast between Miro abandoning his morals as opposed to Dax, who holds strong to them. I love Kirk Douglas's character in this movie. He's one of my favorite actors, period. He does a great job. I've never seen him in a bad film, I don't think. But just his character in this film is fantastic. And I was just thinking of something too. What was it? It's gone, but hopefully it'll come back.
Can I add an aside here?
Sure.
One thing I learned from the commentary about the movie on the Blu-ray was that the first time we see Douglas, we see him in his bunker, no shirt on. Apparently, he had it drilled into his contract that there had to be at least one scene in his movies where he had his shirt off with his chest bared. And I was trying to think back, because the next movie I was thinking about was 7 Days in May, where ironically coincidentally he also plays a colonel in opposition to a general. I was trying to think of where he would have had his shirt off in that one. But the other thing that it reminded me of was the scene in 7 Days in May at the end, where he confronts Burt Lancaster as General Scott and accuses him of being Judas. And so it's it reminded me of that scene where he's talking with I can't pronounce his name, the general, and excoriates the general. Brobald, I guess, isn't it?
He would have put two L's in there, and you could just say Brouillard. But no, Broulard. I even have trouble saying that one too. Yeah. So we've we have determined, that General Miro is certainly he's the bad guy in this movie. Like Robinson said, he first portrays himself as being this moral character that's immediately abandoned, and as the movie goes on, he just abandons his morals more and more and more. Colonel Dax is the exact opposite. He holds true. But what about the general that we can't say his name, Broulard? This guy, I don't even know what to think of him. He will take any tack at any moment with a smile on his face. The scene where he approaches Colonel Dax with the promotion at the end of the movie, and Colonel Dax chews him up and down, and General Broulard just looks at him and says, "Whoa, so you really weren't fucking for General Miro's job. You really are a man of morals. Good for you. You're still on my S list." I don't know what to think of that guy throughout the whole movie. He will do anything and say anything to just keep going. And it doesn't seem like he's doing it. He's a general. How much higher can you go? What more are you going to gain? So I kind of am at a loss for his motivations. Although I do like the character. Let's go down the pecking order a little bit, the chain of command, and let's talk about a little bit about Lieutenant Roget. He is the one. He's one of Colonel Dax's company commanders. I think he's B company commander. Played by Wayne Morris. You've probably seen him in a lot of movies, but it just doesn't connect. He's not a major character. He's not one of the lead characters in a lot of movies. He's one of the minor characters, but he did have a decent Hollywood career. First of all, where does he find his courage? I think that's an easy answer. But more importantly, how does this impact the mission that he's supposed to go on? And then later on in the movie, he's also tasked with leading the firing squad, which I thought was a great little turning point in the movie. It's a great way to just put that little that little kick in the script. What do you guys think about that?
I think that, did I interrupt someone?
No, not at all. Lisa, go ahead.
Okay. I thought it was a great move. And I thought that back when he was supposed to be writing that report, I think that Kirk Douglas already was on to him.
Yeah, I think he was too.
He was already on to him. So
Yeah, from the instant that he came in to the dugout, and private, I think it's Private Arnaud and Lieutenant Roger, after they had come back from the mission, and they're kind of talking to each other, almost yelling at each other. And Kirk Douglas walks in. I think you can sense right there, something's wrong, something's going on.
Well, didn't Roger consider Arnaud dead? Because when he came into the bunker, he said, "Oh, you made it back." He seemed kind of surprised at that. I think he was writing in his report that both of the other people were dead. And
You're probably absolutely right about that, John. And he does say he is surprised to see him. He knows, well, he assumes the other guy died. He doesn't know that he killed him. He just has assumed already that he was mowed down by German machine gun fire. That's what the audience is led to believe with the audio clue that were left there.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think that he thinks Private Arnaud was dead as well. You're right.
I think that also led him to be the one picked to go to the firing squad because he knew too much.
Oh, no, absolutely. That is definitely why Lieutenant Roger picked him. And, he's covering his own tail, but you can see when they, just before they get shot, Lieutenant Roger has to go offer them all blindfolds. And he gets to Private Arnaud and he's like, he's just covered in shame. He can't even hardly pick his face up to look at him when he asks him if he wants a blindfold or not. So I can really feel for him right there, but he's put himself in that position. He's done that to himself. He's shown his colors. And I think Colonel Dax is right to make him go through with that. And that's something that he's, you hear about this all the time. That's something that you're gonna have to live with for the rest of your life. You're gonna have to look at yourself in the mirror every night before you go to bed. And that's gonna come back to haunt you. We are doomed by our own actions, whether for good or ill sometimes. There was the one scene just before it was the night before the attack on the anthill, and I'm kind of baffled by this scene. I like it. The movie could have completely done without it. I don't know that it makes it any better or worse, but and I think it's Private Arnaud again, and another soldier, and they're talking about the merits of dying by a bayonet or dying by a machine gun. It's very Shakespearean almost. The back and forth that they have. What does everybody else think about that scene? I have no idea what to make of it.
It reminded me a little bit of something a little different. There was a program here in DC at the National Portrait Gallery about George Washington and his and the paintings made of George Washington and how the different poses came from British paintings and so on. And they had a whole thing about bayonets, and because there was one painting that showed a subordinate of George Washington basically at his feet, and the poor man is expiring, and he died because of being bayoneted. And they lecturer talked at great length about, what happens when you're bayoneted, like it goes through fabric, and there's, the disease that's present and all that. And that sort of flashed through my mind when they were talking about, well, do you want to be bayoneted or killed with a gun? And I thought that was a little bit existential, but it reminded me of that whole George Washington story. And here's this poor man who was lying at George's feet, and he was in this pose inspired by Roman and Greek sculptures, and the poor guy is expiring and he's taking forever to do it, just like in an opera. But I thought that was more than I wanted to know about how bad it is to be bayoneted. So I do not want to be bayoneted. I'll take the gun.
So you would gladly chime in on that conversation.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that scene? Go ahead, Robinson.
I do, Eric. So in watching that scene, as well as the scene in which the 3 prisoners were spending the night incarcerated, awaiting their execution in the morning, I thought back to a book I read in college that was part of a class called Ontic Anxiety. It wasn't called that, but that was the theme of the class. And it's the anxiety we feel knowing we're going to die, right? Death is a natural part of life. And I think those 2 soldiers were mentally and verbally in that particular scene coming to grips with the reality that they more than likely were not going to survive the next day. And that was their method of dealing with that, or at least the talkative soldier. And then the 3 gentlemen, the night prior to their execution, they were dealing with that anxiety very differently. And this particular book was written about the Spanish Revolution. And the whole story is what's taking place in this cell the night before all of these prisoners are about to be executed. And Sartre points out all of these different behaviors as people come to terms with their own imminent demise. So anyway, I flashed back to that book in that particular scene, knowing what had been said about the anthill and the likelihood of survival for the troops, and then also for the 3 who were about to be executed.
What was the title of that book?
I bet you could Google it and find it. It's a really good book because the main character who's telling the story in first person is sharing his own limited anxiety, which is interesting, but describing, other prisoners urinating themselves or crying or praying or whatever. And he ends up surviving. He ends up not being shot in the morning. Everybody else does. So it's a really incredible story. I don't remember the book. I know I kept it probably from my college days, but I don't have the name. Sorry.
When you mentioned that, the urinating and all that, I was working for a bank about a decade or so ago, and we had an armed robbery. And when you mentioned that, I was thinking, oh my God, the robber came in, and it was close to closing time on a Friday. So I was out in the middle of this big lobby, and everybody else was behind bullet resistant glass. It's not bulletproof, but I heard later from the other people who were behind the glass, and one told me, oh, this new young teller was at the drive-through window, and she wet her, she urinated. She was so upset because he came in and he held a gun to the head of one of the customers right there at the window. And if customers were out in the lobby, there were 2 customers out in the lobby and me, and I ran back to my manager's office. So I didn't see all this. So, but we all compared our stories afterwards, and there were some that were brave and some that were, nervous. And the good thing for me was my manager, actually, I got some actual bonus points because my manager was in her office, and I ran in, and she was from Ecuador, and she was so upset when I told her we were being robbed that she couldn't remember a word of English. So I had to get on the phone and try to reach the operator, and we did everything wrong, everything that she drilled us, and we did wrong. We didn't push the panic buttons, and the police came, and he was long gone. But I do remember that actually it was quite a flood by the drive-through window. But everybody survived. Nobody was hurt, except maybe a little bit emotionally, psychologically.
I've said this, many times in all of our conversations in the past. You never know what response anybody's going to have to situations like that. Whether it's those heroic situations where you save everybody's lives, you save your entire unit, and you get the Medal of Honor, or whether you're put in those very stressful situations and you just buckle under the pressure and you can't even move. Nobody knows how they're going to react until you get into those spots. And then even then, it's you're left to the whims of not your choices, but just your body's going to respond, your brain's going to respond, and you're going to act in a certain way. Who knows how that way is going to be? And we see that kind of as well. I'm going to transition to when they're the night before the execution, when they're all in that cell, but when they're coming out the next day to be executed. You see the different responses by the three different soldiers. One of them obviously can't give too much response because he's being carried out in a stretcher. But you have Private Farrell, who is just absolutely breaking down. He's crying. He even the priest that he's walking with is telling him to get a hold of himself. And he simply cannot. And that's Timothy Carey. And we'll talk a bit about him in a second. But then you also have Joe Turkel, who's leading that procession. He's the one that has been put there by Lieutenant Roger. If I got that right. Yeah, and that is Private Arnaud. Yep. He is stoic. He doesn't care. He knows what's going to happen. He knows it's wrong. Nothing he can say is going to change it. So he's just braced himself for the worst. And, it's just, it is what it is. What did you guys think about those different reactions that they had as they're coming out to be executed?
Didn't he break down initially and the priest told him to buck up and he thought of his family before he came out?
Right. Yeah. And then as they're coming out, he's losing even more. He's becoming more emotional. He's sobbing on the priest's shoulder and on his arm. The priest is still trying to console him with words of faith, but he's also telling him, hey, you basically take this as a man. Stop all this nonsense. It's going to happen regardless. So all this pageantry that you're putting out there is not going to change anything. That, like I said, that actor, Timothy Carey, Chris, I'd be interested to hear what kind of notes were given at the end of the Blu-ray, because he was somewhat of an interesting person on set, to the point where he was basically fired from the movie after it was about more than 3/4 done. I don't want to say he messed up his scenes on purpose, but he just didn't seem to do very well in his scenes, according to Kubrick and to Kirk Douglas. And I want to read some more about this. I tried to look for, something that was more descriptive, but at some point during the filming as well, he faked his own kidnapping to try to draw attention to his name, not so much the movie itself, but to him as an actor. And Chris, I'm curious if there was any, really memorable notes or passages that came through your extra features on the end of that Blu-ray about that. Chris says no, he disappears right away. I'm sure that's a technical thing. There he is. The comment, there was on Blu-rays particularly, there's often a way you can watch the movie with a overlaid commentary, often by the director or somebody. So in this one, they had a film critic, expert, aficionado, who basically talked through the movie, each scene, talking about what was going on, talking about the actors and so on. And he talked about Carey, and basically said that he did a lot of ad-libbing. He stole scenes, and it became very problematic. You might remember the scene where they're in the night before they're going to be executed. He's eating the roast duck. Apparently, they had to do 57 takes on that because of the way he did it, and they were running out of ducks. So they finally did get a scene with him. And about the firing, if you recall, there's the scene in that same setting where he's shown against the wall, crying, kneeling and crying. That's not him.
that's the actor that replaced him because he had been fired by that point. So they had to, that's the way he shot him. So it's also an indication they were shooting these scenes out of sequence, not like some of these other war movies we've seen. But apparently he was a real problem on the set because of his eagerness to steal these scenes and to ad lib in places that, you know, Kubrick, being the perfectionist he was not happy with.
He used some of that to his advantage, though. I also read in a couple different spots where he wanted more out of Kirk Douglas, Stanley Kubrick did, and he knew that that Timothy Carey, when he would ad lib or, you know, try to steal those scenes, it really made Kirk Douglas upset. And so Kubrick would tell him every once in a while when he wanted to see more out of Kirk Douglas, he would tell him, go ahead and act up, really get under his skin. And he would get what he wanted out of Kirk Douglas just by having Timothy Carey, you know, play the part that he wasn't supposed to play, which I found kind of interesting. And then you talk about what do you say, 57 takes on that prison cell scene. It reminds me of another thing that I read about Adolphe Menjou as well, who played General Bullard. There was a scene that Kubrick had done with him. I think they did it 15 or 16 times. And basically Adolphe Menjou's like, okay, it's done. And Kubrick's like, no, I want to do it again. And I guess he just tore Kubrick up one side and down the other, you know, talking about how green he is in directing. And he even started to throw out personal comments at him. And he just raised a ruckus. And Kubrick just sat there. And when he was done, he said, okay, let's do it again. Let's get it one more time. He just maintained his calmness. Adolphe Menjou is this veteran actor being told by this brand new director, you're not giving me what I want. Let's do the scene again before we go to lunch. He got what he wanted, but it took a while. But I quite honestly, and the only reason I think of that story is because I would just love to see Stanley Kubrick in action, behind the camera, directing his actors, directing these movies. I'll never get to see that. Unfortunately, he's not with us anymore. The best we're going to get is just by watching his films. And Chris, I think that's fantastic that they have the voiceover like that as you're watching the film and you're getting all these little facets of it. I really need to up my technology game a little bit and start investing in these things.
Often, some of the best ones are when they have the director actually doing the voiceover and explaining what was going on and why he was doing such and such a thing.
And that's the way you had with Sam Mendes in 1917, right? He was actually doing the voiceovers. Yeah,
I think that's right. Yeah.
How awesome would that be? I picked the wrong career to go into. Oh, well, we live with our choices. Let's talk about the actors. We talked about this a little bit, and John brought it up initially right at the beginning. You know, we're supposed to be looking at the French Army, the 701st French Infantry Division. Nobody's talking any French. Everybody's mostly speaking Americanized English. You have a couple British actors in there with their accents. Did that make the movie any different for you? Did you even notice it? By the way, Kirk Douglas speaks fluent French and never spoke a word of French in the whole movie. So, yeah. But did that make a difference for you in the movie? Or I personally, I never even noticed it. Every time I watch it, I never notice it.
I did. That was one of the first things I think I noticed. And I said to John, I said, is this a true story? Why, if this is in, you know, about the French army, it was kind of disconcerting for me. You know, I got used to it, but I did notice it right away, really.
She's a realist. We watch a lot of English programs with subtitles.
Yes.
Because I can't understand some of them.
But yeah, it was. But I guess initially I didn't understand why they were doing that. Why are there not people speaking French? You know, that this is it's about the French army. So yeah, I thought it made a difference to me. It did.
All right. Anybody else have a thought on that?
I go ahead, Lisa.
I agree with, I don't know her name.
Karen.
I agree with Karen. I like the word disconcerting. It was just a little off for me at the beginning, but as you went, you got used to it.
Right.
Yeah, I for most of the movie, I didn't pay any attention to it, but I would find myself suddenly with this random thought when Kirk Douglas would be in a scene. Why is there an American soldier in the French army? And then, I mean, then it hit me. Well, he's acting, but I could not shake. It would just pop in my mind. What is an American soldier doing there? That doesn't make any sense. Yeah, mercenary or, but that was distracting a little bit throughout the movie, but for the most part, it was pretty seamless.
Okay. That's interesting that, three of you chimed in that it was a little distracting. I mean, I can't fault you for that. Like I said, I never notice it every time I watch it. I just suspend that whole, that whole aspect of it. Maybe I'm just so in awe of the acting and the cinematography and just everything else that it just, I never even think about that. Chris, did you have something?
Yeah, it didn't particularly bother me. But again, on the Blu-ray extra, they had an interview with Harris, the producer. And he actually addressed that question directly because it was an issue apparently when they were deciding how to film this. And he said that the analogy he drew was, imagine you've got a French novel that's been translated into English. You would not read the dialogue in the English version with a French accent. And he said they treated this Paths of Glory because it was ultimately, it traces back to a French novel that was based on this whole case. They just treated it as if it was a film translation where you wouldn't be listening for the accent of in the original language.
That's an interesting way to look at it. I hadn't thought about it that way, and I'm glad you brought that up. And actually, now that I think about it, do you think it might have been maybe a little more distracting if they tried to have these fake French accents, especially Kirk Douglas? Can you imagine?
Oh, yeah.
And like I said, he speaks fluently, but it's not something that, his fans are probably familiar with. So to hear him try to, voice these lines with a French accent, I don't know, I think that might have been a little more distracting than just, not having any accents at all.
I would have liked to hear Ralph Meeker with a French accent.
Well, and my next question was going to be, of course, because we are running out of time, and I always ask who is everybody's favorite character and why. Now I know who John's is. John is a big Ralph Meeker.
Now, mine was Kirk Douglas, just
Douglas?
because he didn't waver from his mission, his duty, his conscience through the whole thing.
And he's just such a good actor, my goodness.
Yeah.
And I didn't even get to talk about that tracking shot where, as opposed or in contrast to George Macready when he's walking through the trenches, that scene where Kirk Douglas is walking through the trenches, I just get goosebumps every time I see that. He's just so intense, and everything that's going on around the soldiers, you could see the looks on their faces, the explosions going on, and nothing phases him. He's determined. That scene just gets me every time. That might be one of my most favorite scenes in all the movies that I've ever seen in my life. Sorry, but I'm kind of bummed I didn't get to talk about that one scene. Karen, who is your favorite actor?
I would have to go with Kirk Douglas too. I mean, I'm sure that my whole opinion about Kirk Douglas is influencing this decision. I agree with you that he's a great actor, and I just thought he was very powerful in this movie.
How about you, Lisa?
Other than Kirk Douglas, which I thought he was great, and that he was pinned, just trapped in every situation with these powerful people who were trying to manipulate him, and so yeah, for that reason, and he held his ground. But the artillery guy,
the one who refused he wanted written
Yeah.
orders.
yes,
And I don't care what you say, I need some written orders. What if something happens to you? Where does that leave me?
Right.
And then he came
That's a
back
great
at the
line.
end, and he came back at the end, and called out that guy. I can't.
Right.
Paul, General
Right.
Paul. Yeah.
Robinson, how about you?
Well, I think I'm with everybody else, Kirk Douglas.
he basically dominated the whole film, so it was hard not to kind of center on him. I think he did a great job. Of course, he's an iconic actor, and he's good in everything he's done. I would have to agree with Lisa, though. The artillery captain was a great character, and that was a nice little plug in the middle of the movie.
We'll go with Chris, and then we'll go with Audrey.
I had the same reaction. I think both. I think Kirk Douglas, obviously, is to me anyway, was the key to this movie. But I like Lisa's point too about the captain who simply refused to buckle to what seems like a war crime kind of order from the general.
Audrey, go ahead.
Well, I don't want to be boring and redundant. I mean, I love Kirk Douglas, but what I think is I like the ensemble scene at the end with the young German woman who I guess was a prisoner of war, and then the focus on all the faces of those men. And it seemed to me a lot of them were quite old to be soldiers, but you know, when you looked at the faces of the men and they started crying, you know, I had a Ukrainian friend years ago, and you know, something sad would happen and somebody would cry, she would say in Ukraine, "Oh, plache, Audrey, plache," you know, she's everybody's crying, and then everybody would start crying. And at any rate, that's that scene, that sort of ensemble of all those faces, especially the young boy, the young blonde boy, you know, you're just looking at all of them and thinking, what, you know, they're crying because, I mean, who knows where they're going to wind up. And they showed some kindness, I thought, there. And the other thing I wanted to mention is, I don't know if anybody else saw the Washington Post today. I live in Alexandria near Mount Vernon, and the cover of the Washington Post today, when you think of this movie, it's such a contrast, the anti-war movie, and the cover of the Post, if you go online maybe and see it, I mean, it's civilians from the airport yesterday in Afghanistan, and they're covered with blood. I mean, I brought the paper in, we were eating brunch, and I put it on the table, and I was almost like, oh my God, you know, it was like, it's like war, and it's right in your face. And, you know, now with color photography, I mean, when I grew up, you know, New York Times, it was called the old gray lady, black and white. But to see these pictures of these women with their faces covered in blood, you know, and then watching this movie, it brings it home. So
I would agree. That last scene is it's a great scene, but you're right, it's very emotional. It doesn't start out that way. They're catcalling her and you know, banging their beer steins or their wine bottles. But once she starts singing and they start to realize, you know, hey, we know this tune. It's got different words, but we know the tune.
Yeah.
And it just kind of, and we've seen this in other movies as well. You know, there's always that connection. You can always find that one thing that's going to bring your enemy into your world. You know, whatever that might be. And this is one of those scenes where you see that. We know this tune. She's the enemy. She's German, but she's singing a song that we're familiar with and that resonates with us as well. And so the catcall stopped, the banging on the table stopped. And you're right. You start to see tears. You start to see emotion, and you realize that, you know, it doesn't matter who you're fighting. If it's the Taliban over in Afghanistan right now, or if it's Germans back in 1916, we're all still just people. And we do have those connecting points. Just before I get to you, Lisa, I'll be different. I'll be bold. As much as I love Kirk Douglas in this movie, I will say George Macready was mine. He was a despicable person as General Miro, but I thought he did a great job as being that despicable person. And also, if I say George Macready, it gives me a chance to bring up the fact that about a week ago, I saw him in something that you wouldn't even think after watching this movie that you would see him in. And that was Attack of the Alligator People, some really bad 1950 B horror movie. And here's George Macready as this alligator person who's undergone this scientific experiment. You know, you go from some really bad B movie horror stuff to Paths of Glory with Kirk Douglas. Hey, I got to give you your credit. You got a pretty good range of Go ahead, Lisa. You're the last one. You get the last comment tonight.
It just occurred to me when you were talking that through the whole movie, Kirk Douglas was trying to tap into humanity. He was
Oh.
fighting against all of these forces to tap into humanity. And then at the end, it was that woman singing the song, and that connected a little bit with their humanity. So
And I'll leave you all with this.
Good point.
That's an excellent point, and it's actually one of the most saddening parts of the whole movie, is because after everything that goes on, you get to the end of the movie, and at least for me, when I walk away, as he's walking back into his barracks, you realize nothing has changed. Nothing. Everything still goes on the way it had before the court-martial, before the attack on the anthill, before the executions. It's still the same. Nothing's been affected. Nobody's minds have been changed, and everything's going to just continue on the way it is for another 2 more years, sadly enough.
Could I just offer a couple of quick comments before?
Chris, you get the last word then.
A couple of things on the Blu-ray. If you get the Criterion Collection Blu-ray, they've got a great interview that they picked up from BBC of Kirk Douglas when he was shooting a film over there. It runs, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes, I think. And he talks a little bit about Paths of Glory in that one. So if you're a Kirk Douglas fan, I kind of recommend that to you. The second thing is that the woman who does the singing at the end wound up marrying Stanley Kubrick after the movie was over.
Really?
Yeah. And they
married for the rest of his life. That was his
Right.
one and only wife.
Yeah. And the third thing was the opening of the movie kind of struck me a lot like Casablanca, because you have the voiceover that comes up, giving the background of the thing. And then immediately it cuts to another scene about what's going on. In Casablanca, it's they're tracking down the infidels or whatever. And in this movie, you immediately move into some of the you immediately move into another phase of the whole proceeding. And the voiceover that was done by in that opening was done by the actor who headed up the panel of judges at the end.
I'll have to go back and look at that.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see who it was. I'm trying to think of who that might be.
I think his name was Chappell or something like that.
Oh, Peter Capel. Okay. Yeah, narrator of opening sequence, chief judge of the court martial. All right. I did not know that. I love having you in these segments, Chris, because you always bring those tidbits of information I could research for 2 weeks, and I'm still not going to get some of the stuff that you bring up. So, well done, well done. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Next month, I hope we can see everybody back. We are going to be looking at the more recent movie that deals with the death of Osama bin Laden, tracking him down and killing him, Zero Dark 30. Jessica Chastain, she does a great job in that movie. And if you haven't seen it, it is a powerful movie. The whole way through, it's fantastic, but certainly those last 20 minutes. Every time I watch it, I cannot stop looking at the screen. It just captures me. So I hope everybody can join us next month for Zero Dark 30. We have more movie nights coming up. I'm putting together my 2020 calendar now. I'm not going to tell you what's coming out in the fall, but we do have some really good movies. And certainly, if you guys have any movie suggestions for me, we seem to have our cast of regulars every month. So if there's something that you'd like to see, send me an email. We'll see if we can't get that going. I don't want to just dominate the movie selection all by myself. I'd like to see what you folks want to see as well. So please, you have my email, eric.wright@dva.wisconsin.gov. You can find me on our museum's website, wisvetsmuseum.com. You can find my email address that way. But if you do have a suggestion, I'm more than happy to hear them. I hope everybody has a great Friday night. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. And we look forward to seeing you next month in September.
Thank you.